Washington, D.C., Gallaudet University. While attending college, the Lord called her into missions. She joined Door International, reaching the deaf for Christ in 2000. She has been with them since, living overseas and traveling worldwide, ministering to the deaf in various roles, and assisted in Bible translation work in translating the Bible into the sign languages for the deaf. Her focus is now on ministering and encourage the deaf women of Asia, and will be going to South Asia this fall, Lord willing. We are very honored to have Julia with us tonight. To know this lady in a special way. From the time we spoke to her last year about speaking for us, we've connected, and we both lead very busy lives. She's running across the world most of the time, and we have grandchildren, and we're both nurses. And so our schedules, I don't know, we probably tried 6 months before we got together. But we had a lovely lunch together, and we just kind of bonded in a special way. Have a lot of things that we could connect on. So that was really nice. And so I would like to introduce her first as one of my new and very special friends. And Hannah is, she's a registered nurse and a certified nurse midwife. She's truly a farm girl raised in a preacher's home with a big heart for women, children, and Christian service. She's married to her best friend Rex, Rex the First, I believe, and whom she met because they have a son, Rex, too, as well, R.A., whom she met on the campus of God's Bible School. Hannah received her nursing degree in 1983. A few years later, in 1987, she completed her studies at the Medical University of South Carolina, become a certified nurse midwife. Following God's direction, she and her husband have served at several missionary posts. Hannah is the mother of 3 sons, Rex II, Benjamin, and Jeffrey. Hannah is the author of Babies, Bullets, and Bee Stings, Memories of a Missionary Midwife. And if you haven't read it, it's very interesting, and it is for sale downstairs, so make sure that you get by that table and check that out. Her life truly reflects Ecclesiastes 9:10. Whatever your hands find to do, do it with all your might. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Hannah tonight.
Good evening. It's good to see you all here. And tell me how this clicker works, Abby.
There's an on-off switch in the back.
There's a turn on in the back. I'm sorry. I was supposed to tell you that, Hannah. There we go.
And the left-right buttons.
Okay, so if I push the right button, will this slide all the way up? All right. So tonight we're talking about the practically perfect plan. Emanana. The night guard's voice on the walkie-talkie startles me from a sound sleep. I leap out of bed, stumble over to the dresser, and fumble in the dark to find the button on the radio to answer him. He does not give any details, just that I am needed at the clinic. 1:42 a.m. Pray for me, please, I beg my husband Rex as I run out the door. I know they wouldn't call at this time of the night unless it's an emergency. 1:44 a.m. No question about the emergency part. I am greeted by the sight of a woman lying on her back in one of our labor beds, a 5-inch loop of pale blue umbilical cord trailing out between her legs onto the mattress. It's a breech presentation, Maribel, the night nurse, informs me as she hurries to call the ambulance. 1:46 a.m. Quickly gloving up, I gently check the position of the baby, who is doing his best to enter the world knee first. Definitely not the right way. I help the mother to turn over and kneel, chest on the bed, to take the weight of the baby off of the cord while I listen anxiously for a heartbeat. The little one is still alive, but his heart is beating too slowly. I explain to the mother what we have to do and why, and I have prayer with her, asking God in His mercy to spare the life of her baby so she can raise it to serve Him. 2:38 a.m. Where is that ambulance? Oxygen mask fitted to her face, IV fluid is rapidly running into her vein. The mother has been ready to go for a while. The Red Cross Toyota Land Cruiser finally pulls up to the porch, the attendant apologetically explaining why they couldn't get here sooner. The ambulance wouldn't start. We had to push it to get it going. 3:06 a.m. We bump across the rocks and out of the yard on our way to the large maternity hospital in San Pedro Sula, normally a 2-hour and 15-minute trip. I brace my feet and fight to keep my seat on the narrow wooden bench next to the stretcher, my hand still in place on the baby's leg, firmly keeping him inside and off of his umbilical cord until we can get to the operating room for the cesarean delivery that will save his life. The woman's husband sits beside me, holding aloft the bag of IV fluid in one hand and gripping his wife's hand at the other, with the portable tank of oxygen and large garbage bag with emergency supplies that Maribel packed and sent, just in case. There's no room for anything else in the back. The ambulance itself carries absolutely nothing except a vinyl-covered stretcher, without even a sheet to cover the threadbare spots that have worn through with long use. 3:17 a.m. I glance again at the tube feeding into the mother's arm. This time, instead of a clear stream of fluid, there is dark red blood backing up the line. Briefly letting go of the baby, who's been staying up inside where he's not pressing on the cord, I grab the IV bag and work to get the fluid running properly again. 3:18 a.m. Glove on once more, I check the baby and discover with horror that 2 inches of leg and knee have insisted on being born. I ease things back inside with one hand, stretching with the other, slide open the tiny window opening into the driver's compartment. The baby's trying to come. Please hurry all you can. Instantly, I feel a change as the driver accelerates. Dear Lord, please help us please keep us from having a wreck, I silently plead. At least it's not raining, so we don't have this hazard of slick mud added to the danger as we barrel along through the darkness. 3:34 a.m. I am still praying, but the words are different now. Oh God, don't let me throw up. Oh, please don't let me throw up. Please, God, please help me. I lose everything in my stomach thanks to the rocking motion of the speeding ambulance over curvy dirt mountain roads. I'm thankful that at least I have not eaten since 6 the evening before, so it's mostly liquid. 3:39 a.m. The woman's husband follows suit, and I grab for the IV bag as he can no longer hold it while he miserably empties his stomach as well. 4:03 a.m. We've been jouncing and bouncing for nearly an hour and have finally gotten to the paved section of road. The swells of sweat, diesel fuel, and amniotic fluid swirl around me as the driver accelerates even more. I discover that I can drape the bag of IV fluid over my shoulder and hold it there with my cheek, giving one arm a rest. The other arm has started to cramp, but I grimly bend over and keep the baby pressed up inside his mother as she coughs repeatedly. I gently rub her leg and smile at her. I can't imagine the agony she must be feeling. All this time she's been lying helpless, thrown from side to side, and a few times banging her head against the back door as the ambulance careens down the mountain. Off and on, she feels the urge to bear down, but valiantly grits her teeth and obeys my commands to breathe, don't push. 4:23 a.m. I thought my stomach was empty. With both hands again occupied, all I can do is bend over and let the rest of what's in there splat on the floor. At least, that's only 2 times for me, compared to the husband's 4. The siren wails as we fly along, swerving back and forth to miss the cars that do not readily yield the right of way. 4:30 a.m. We whip around a corner and pull up to the hospital emergency entrance, making the trip in slightly less than 1.5 hours. I count 5 people lying asleep on the ground, with many others standing around outside as they wait for word from the staff on a loved one's outcome. There is no such thing here as a husband or mother giving support to a laboring woman. No one is allowed to accompany her inside the hospital. But I trot determinedly beside my patient as she's wheeled through the doors, keeping my hand in and the baby's leg up and off the cord until we can get to an exam room, and a troop of doctors and nurses converges, one of them taking my place. Another glides an ultrasound wand briefly over the mother's abdomen. With relief, I notice that the baby's tiny heart is still beating. Thank God, we have made it in time. I follow the stretcher around a corner and down a short hall, stopping outside the operating room to wait for our equipment to be returned. On the ride back to San Luis, I sit up front between the driver and the attendant, who politely attempt to include me in their conversation. I am so tired that I can't keep an intelligent dialogue going, and they finally give up, allowing me to fitfully doze while they talk back and forth to each other over the top of my nodding head. 6:57 a.m. The ambulance pulls up once again to the front porch of our clinic. I stiffly step down to the ground, clutching my aching back, thankful to have the nightmare over and to have arrived back home in one piece. I am so grateful to God for his help and for the part that he allowed me to have in the drama, but I want nothing more in life at the moment than a big hug from my husband and a hot shower. Although we did make it to the hospital in time for the baby to be delivered successfully by cesarean section, the mom showed up in our clinic a week later with a raging infection and an extremely tender abdomen. We had to transfer her once again to the city hospital. Ironically, when they opened her back up, they discovered that the source of her problem was a gauze sponge that the surgeon had mistakenly left inside her abdomen when he stitched her closed following the delivery of her baby boy. So goes the saga of missionary nursing. Now that's the first chapter from my recently published book, Babies, Bullets, and Bee Stings, Members of the Missionary Midwife. I do have it downstairs, and I would like you to know that all of the proceeds, as it has been since I published it, are going to missions. So when you purchase the book, you're making a contribution to missions. You may wonder how in the world a journey like the one I just shared is anything close to being perfect. Well, hang on for the ride, and I think by the time you hear the rest of the story, you'll see why God's plan for your life, no matter where that leads you, is not just practically, but completely perfect. I'm a missionary nurse midwife, and God's plan for my life has taken me places to I would never have imagined traveling. Some of you may be experiencing things, whether happy or sad, that you would never have believed could have been God's plan, perfect plan for your life. Sometimes we wish we could see far enough ahead to know how to detour around the unpleasant or the difficult circumstances, or how to take a shortcut to the happy places. But just remember, God is never taken by surprise by anything that happens to us, and He promises to be with us and give us strength as our day. We can't see around the bends in the road, but as we walk one step at a time with Him, He directs us in the right way, and He assures us of reaching the correct final destination. When I was still in my teens, God especially spoke the words of Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 to me. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct or make straight your paths. So let me share with you some more stories about His plan for my life that I hope will inspire you to trust God with yours and let Him help you find joy in the journey. While it is true that we leave the details of the plan up to God, there are some things that we ladies can do in our walk with God to help smooth the path. One of these is preparation. How many of you have moved from one house to another? Haven't lived in the same house all your life? Probably all of us. What was involved with that? What did you have to do to get ready for that move? Pack. Well, have you ever thought about what's involved for a missionary nurse to move to the country in which she'll be serving? First of all, not only does she have to take enough necessities for a several-year stay, she needs to get her medical supplies gathered and packed as well. Then she has to get to her destination. Now, here in the USA, we can just travel from one state into another without even slowing down at the border or the state line, but not so in many countries of the world. My medical missions journey involved many border crossings with police checkpoints, long lines at ticket counters, passport verification, and luggage inspection. My most memorable border crossing occurred when our family moved from Costa Rica to Nicaragua. We arrived at the border just before the official closing time, but they shut down early for the day and they wouldn't let us cross until the next morning. We were a little bit jealous of the cows that casually walked from one country to the next, and they didn't even ask them for their passports. But then, of course, they weren't hauling all the luggage and baggage that we were either. There was no running water, nor were there adequate restroom facilities, but we did have bushes large enough to kind of crouch down behind, and we had plenty of wet wipes. Very thankful for that. We started the night out in our vehicles with the windows rolled up for security's sake, but the heat and the humidity were just fierce. And by morning, we had rolled down all the windows, opened the doors, and my husband Rex ended up sleeping part of the night on the cement wall instead of in the stifling heat of the van. We were all very thankful for the sunrise and the chance to be first in line the next morning for the day's crossings. So after getting to their country of service, missionary nurses often have to learn a new language in order to be able to use the expertise that they have worked so hard to obtain. So there you are, fresh out of Bible college and nursing school, anxious to put all your education to the work. You arrive in country X, but instead of grabbing your medical bag and going door to door with your syringe, administering to people's souls while you give them shots to heal their bodies, you're stuck in a classroom 5 days a week, 4 hours a day for an entire year, cramming your exhausted brain full of funny-sounding words. Now, you might be tempted to think that all that investment in language study is just a waste of time. Why not get out with the people, immerse yourself in their culture, pick up what you need as you go along? Well, let me tell you from experience that unless you learn the language and learn it well, you will not have an effective ministry. What if someone runs up to you, obviously distressed, and pants out, "Mi hermana trató de quitarse la vida esta mañana. Tomó una gran cantidad de veneno hace poco y ahora tiene mucho dolor de la panza y casi no puede respirar. Venga y ayúdanos, por favor." Well, if you don't know Spanish, by the time you get a translator to tell you that this man is pleading with you to hurry to his house and help his brother, who is hardly breathing because he tried to commit suicide by drinking poison. He could be dead. And you wouldn't have a chance to help either his body or his soul. And by the way, that has happened. In fact, it happened the very first Sunday after we moved from Costa Rica to Nicaragua. But I didn't hear about it until it was too late to help. A brother of one of the national pastors drank a bottle of pesticide and killed himself because he wasn't able to earn enough money to buy food for his children. And he couldn't stand to hear them crying from hunger. 3 other times at the mission clinic in Honduras, where I've worked many times, I've cared for young people who tried to end their lives by drinking poison. 2 of them I was able to help save, but I wouldn't have been of much use if I hadn't known how to ask the family and find out what was going on. Then, of course, there are times, no matter how well the missionary nurse has learned another language, when some of those thousands of new words that she has stored up here will twist themselves around over each other and haphazardly tumble out here, sometimes with pretty funny results. For instance, one Sunday night in church, my husband was requesting prayer for a man who was having health problems. Rex couldn't figure out why the congregation suddenly broke out into gales of laughter until he realized that instead of saying the Spanish word for blood pressure, which is sanguinea, ends in the letter A, and has the emphasis on the middle syllable, he had said sanguineo, with the emphasis on the next to the last syllable, and the letter O instead of A at the end of the word. No big deal, you might think. But those 2 tiny changes in the word changed the meaning in anything but a tiny way, and this poor man, instead of having problems with high blood pressure, was reported to be suffering from his holy banana. On another occasion, we had some friends over for supper not long before the end of our second 4-year term. So I've been talking Spanish for a long time. I doubt that they still remember everything that I fixed for the meal, but they'll never forget the laughter that we shared when I asked the wife to please pass me the bowl of mosquitoes. Now, I hadn't concocted a strange new dish for the occasion. What I really wanted was to eat another helping of carrots, or zanahorias in Spanish, not a spoonful of those pesky, whining zancudos, or mosquitoes. So learning a new language gave me an opportunity to make plenty of amusing and embarrassing mistakes, but nevertheless, it was a vital part of my preparation for medical missions. So what else besides preparation helps a missionary nurse fulfill that perfect plan and still find joy in her journey? Well, adaptation is another essential ingredient. The culture of the country will probably be unlike anything she's used to, and that will affect not only her practice of medicine, but her whole lifestyle. The foods that she will eat may not be her typical diet. You ever heard the joke about how to tell the difference between a first, second, and third term missionary? Well, a fly lands on this plate of food, and the first term missionary jumps up and dumps all the food in the wastebasket in disgust. A fly lights on the second term missionary's food, and he grimaces, picks out the fly, and then eats the food. A fly zooms into the third term missionary's plate, and he hollers, "Thank you, Lord, for the extra protein," and cleans up his meal, fly and all. Well, those things in the cooking pot are not flies, but we have served 2 4-year-plus terms in Central America, as well as another full year with the trips we've made back and forth in the summers. So it doesn't bother me at all to buy the blocks of sweetener that are made with crystallized sugarcane juice and melt them down in boiling water to come up with a delicious pancake syrup. We just have to strain out the honeybees that swoop down into the huge vats of boiling juice and drown, because they're, cooked down over an open fire outside. Now, there were over 60 bees from this block that we cooked a few summers back in Honduras. And we got most of them out, but a few random bugs broke off, or legs broke off in the stirring, and they can get stuck in your teeth. So the flavor's worth it. It's really good. And the syrup is boiled plenty long enough, so you don't have to worry about any germs that you might get infected with. Should you want coffee with your pancakes, you don't need an electric coffee maker. This is what I've used many, many times during the night shift at our clinic in Honduras to help me stay awake. You just put your ground coffee in the bag, pour boiling water over it, and hold it over a cup. Now, I will say that I prefer my coffee just plain though, not ground up with pepper, as was served to me by the mother of one of my maternity patients. I could not figure out what that odd taste was. And after she left the room, I poured it down the sink and didn't ask for another cup of it. But plain Honduran coffee is pretty good. When you make a trip to a major city to buy groceries, if you're hungry en route, the street vendors at major intersections will be glad to sell you food and drink. Or you can get your meat at an open-air local market, like this one, where we shopped every Saturday when we lived in Nicaragua. Again, plenty of boiling water will destroy the germs, although if you cook those beef eyeballs long enough, they'll be too tough to enjoy them in the soup in which they're usually served. But if you add garlic to that soup, then it makes it really tasty. Here's a week's worth of fruit and veggies that I bought for myself and the nursing intern student who was with me while we worked at the clinic in Honduras a few summers ago. And all of that food cost less than 2 fast food meals in the United States. It was enough for pretty much a week. Now you can buy meals at McDonald's in many foreign countries, but if I want to eat out, I want something more special, like this freshly caught fish meal. It's just a little bit disconcerting to have your meat staring up at you while you eat it, but you can leave the head and the bones on your plate. Now when I was in Haiti, just a few days after the major earthquake in January of 2010, fresh food was practically non-existent, and we were very grateful for the soup that was flavored with dry fish heads that resident missionary Don Mobley fixed for us. In fact, it was actually one of the best soups I've ever eaten. Now, I was fortunate to always have either a two-burner hot plate or a gas stove to do my cooking on, and I never had to work with wood-burning stoves like these that are very common in Honduran houses. Now, if you're going to bake your bread, you have something other than a stove like that. So they have these ovens outside, and I think this chicken must have decided to make it a little easier on the cook who was going to roast him. And he just, got in there a little ahead of time. Now, my husband and sons didn't mind not having to bring home the wood to keep those kinds of stoves going, but such a job is a very common sight for some medical missionaries. In fact, it's one of the cultural things that makes the job even more interesting. See the machetes in that man's hand? Even young boys use them daily. They just grow up learning how to do them. But what does machete mean? Is it a tool or a weapon, or many of the wounds that I have cleaned and sutured have been from machete blades and gave me plenty of chances to practice my skill with the needle. Now, a missionary nurse may have to adapt to a different way of getting food, not just the food and the cooking of it, a different way of getting it than she's used to here in the States. For instance, we tried growing our own garden in Nicaragua. Of course, that was a few years ago. So here's our oldest son, Rex, too, who's now in his 30s, helping to plow it with our neighbor's ox team. Unfortunately, that same neighbor had chickens, and they came over and ate every single plant as soon as it sprouted, so we didn't get anything from it. Bananas are plentiful and cheap. In fact, to this day, my boys aren't real crazy about bananas because they eat so many of them. And if you tie a stalk of them from a rope that's hanging vertically, they'll ripen just one row at a time up the stalk. Unfortunately, when this stalk was given to us, we left them lying on the porch, and all 240 of them ripened at once. So we had plenty of frozen bananas for smoothies and banana bread for a long, long time. They say that teenage boys have big appetites, and when you're hungry enough, you'll eat anything, almost. So adjusting to the size of some of the anythings that are over there can be another challenging part of your culture adaptation. These frogs grow to be as big as softballs, and they're very plentiful, so whenever I go over to the clinic at night, I'm always nervous that I'll step on one, and I haven't kicked them out of the way. I've never scrunched one. When we lived in Nicaragua, we had a broken space behind our toilet with a hole to the outside, and bulgy-eyed bullfrogs like this would come up, and I'd find several a day of them in my bathroom. In fact, our shower was just a 6-inch deep rectangular shaped cement thing in the corner, and we learned to look in before we stepped in because we might have some jumping back buddies in there with us. That same house had iguanas living in the attic, and one afternoon when our oldest son was on a break from schoolwork, he startled an iguana off of his perch in a tree, and he started chasing it around the house. He yelled for me, "Come out quick and help me!" Well, I didn't know what was going on. I thought maybe he'd been hurt, so I jerked open the front door at the precise moment that his quarry reached it. In its frantic haste to escape, the iguana dashed inside. In my frantic haste to prevent his entrance, I slammed the door shut. The poor iguana was literally caught in the middle. He left his tail whipping back on the porch floor, while he, 18 inches shorter than he had been before, skittered across my living room and down the hall. My son, Rex, too, pulled up short and then started screaming at the sight of the iguana-less tail at his feet, and I ran screaming down the hall after the tailless iguana, horrified that he might find a hiding spot before I could shoot him out the door. Fortunately for him, my husband was away for the day teaching, but our next door neighbor valiantly came to my rescue and escorted our unwelcome visitor back outside. We saw him a few times after that, but he never got anywhere close to where our son was chasing him. And for those of you who love spiders, now this was not the largest of the various tarantulas that we've had in our house, but he was one of the most impressive looking. So what else besides a new language, unusual food, and other interesting critters might be different between life here in the good old USA and God's plan for a missionary nurse? Well, the very practice of medicine itself often takes adaptation. She might dispense medicine from gallon jugs into plastic bags and sell it without a prescription to anyone who brings a torn piece of paper with a reasonable request, because prescriptions aren't needed in many foreign countries like they are stateside. She will hope that no one tries any funny business because she doesn't want to have to use the gun that's stored in the clinic room closet. She'll do her best to meet her patient's needs, whatever that may be, such as hanging a bag of IV fluids from the porch window and then trotting back and forth between her patient outside and her patient's inside, so that a poverty-stricken man can save the $5 charge of being admitted and using one of the clinic beds to rest on while his fluids are infusing. She might make home visits to start an IV and give medication to an elderly grandmother who's just too weak and ill to come to the clinic. But why bother? Well, medical missions is a golden opportunity to show and tell of the love of Jesus, the great physician, who heals not only sick bodies, but also sick souls. And people are a whole lot more open to hearing about a God who loves them when they see that care and love modeled in the missionary. The missionary nurse might have the luxury of an autoclave that's used like this, that's used in the clinic in Honduras to sterilize the instruments that she neatly wraps in packets. Or she might borrow them over a charcoal fire and spread them on clean towels, like I did in Haiti after the earthquake when there was no propane for the stove. This tiny Haitian baby was too sick and too weak to nurse or even take a bottle, so we put a tube through his nose and into his stomach to give him fluids. But the only thing we had to connect that tube to was a suction catheter, and the fluid we were giving him kept leaking out of the port in the tubing that's made to be blocked with your thumb as the suction machine is used. So I took the piece of gum I was chewing, stuffed it down into the port opening, cut the finger off a glove and stretched it over the top, and then tied it around with a piece of a tourniquet to hold it all in place. And it worked beautifully. No more leaking, and baby was able to get his fluids that he so desperately needed. So remember, a missionary nurse needs to be able to adapt. She may need to adapt to interesting modes of transportation, such as the back of a pickup truck crammed with people and supplies on the way to a remote clinic. She might pass colorful buses such as this one, or tiny mobile taxis like this one that are a common and pretty inexpensive way to go on a relatively short trip downtown. Now, my most interesting ride as a missionary nurse was when I returned from my first trip to Haiti after the earthquake. I'd flown down in a private jet that was donated for a few weeks by Hendricks Motorsports to help get relief workers into the country because the airport was closed down and no commercial flights were going. But when I returned to the States 2.5 weeks later, Hendricks had pulled their plane out of service. So we got there not in time to go on the Missionary Flights International plane. And after an 18-hour wait on the airport tarmac, the doctor, nurse, or pastor, and another nurse who were in my group joined a couple of other hundred other people in a line at the back of a massive U.S. Air Force C-17 cargo plane. We watched as two large tractor-trailer rigs were backed out of the hold, and at 1:38 in the morning, we walked up the same ramp that the trucks had driven down and seated ourselves on the cold metal floor. When everyone was loaded, each row of people was belted down with a wide strap for safety. Although, as packed in as we were, I didn't think there was much chance of us tumbling around even if we had run into turbulence. Now, there were no smartly dressed stewardesses to bring us drinks and a snack, but no one cared. We were just glad to be going home. Oops. And speaking of home, reminds me that missionary nurses can be used of God in innovative ways even in the United States. During the Penview Bible Institute Jungle Camp, which is held every other year with the mission students in the deep, dark jungle of a friend's farm in central Pennsylvania, I teach emergency childbirth classes as well as first aid classes. And then they're put to good use in the nighttime search and rescue missions in which the young people participate. So yes, adaptation is a key ingredient in being a missionary nurse when you're following God's perfect plan for your life. The missionary nurse may work side to side with U.S. Marines, taking aid to those who are suffering. This was in Haiti after the earthquake. Perhaps she'll use her flashlight at night to sew up a wounded horse. Whoops, not that one. A wounded horse has fallen and torn open his head and his knee. If so, she needs to be sure to check the spots on her legs that touched the ground while she was kneeling to suture her 800-pound patient, because she'll probably need to pull off a couple of leeches that have fastened themselves to her skin, just like I had to do that night. If she's married, she'll likely need to adapt to the need to treat her own family as well. Now, when our middle son Benjamin was a toddler, for some reason or another, he kept getting tummy trouble from parasites. And I could not figure out why, with the immaculate conditions in which we live. Now, Benji is the one on the left. But at least my medical training gave me the knowledge to know how to treat him. And when he fell down our front porch steps in Nicaragua and gashed open his skull the day before his 3rd birthday, missionary nurse mom put in the stitches. When Jeffrey got two severe infections, 2 consecutive summers in Honduras, I started his IV and gave him medications at home until he got so sick that he just had to be treated in the clinic. And when the IV antibiotics that we had there just weren't strong enough, we had to take him to a major hospital in the big city, and he had his own private duty nurse to keep the IVs going on the long bumpy trip in the back seat of the truck that carried him there. So besides helping her own family, a medical missionary can be a blessing to her co-workers. And some of my very most rewarding memories are of the summers in Honduras when I was privileged to deliver missionary babies. Daniel and Tiffany Mountain's son Kenton, and Zach and Sarah Roberts' daughter Elena, just 3 days apart. Now Sarah had preterm labor at 31 weeks and needed extensive monitoring throughout the next 5 weeks, as well as medications to stop her labor on 2 different occasions. And she called her OBGYN in San Pedro, and he said, if you have somebody there that can take care of you, don't even think about coming over that mountain to get here. So because God had a medical missionary in the right place at the right time, Sarah was able to stay at home and get the help she needed while God protected little Elena and kept her from being born too early. And then 4 years later, I had the privilege of welcoming another little baby, or Melton baby, Caden, into the world. The summer following Kenton and Elena's birth, I was in Honduras with Stephen and Yvonne DeLong for the birth of their first child, Joanna Brooke. We still grieve with them over the loss of their precious baby when Yvonne's uterus ruptured during her labor. But God in His providence saved her life, and she did not bleed to death, as she very well may have, had He not orchestrated events so that a medical missionary could be with them to catch the signs of a problem and get her to the hospital in time for the surgery that she so urgently needed. Thankfully, Yvonne's 2 other children still have their mommy with them. In fact, the family is heading as missionaries again with evangelistic faith missions. Just in a few months, they're going to be going back. But although Joanna is missed by her family, we know that she's safe in heaven, and God did spare Yvonne's life. Yeah. And finally, what besides preparation and adaptation does it take to fulfill God's perfect plan for your life or for the missionary nurse? Well, in a heart that beats in tune with Christ's heart, compassion, just like he showed to people that came to him for healing, is absolutely essential. Missionary nurses see the heart-wrenching poverty of those who walk a great distance to seek care. They ache at the living conditions of ragged, dirty children who would otherwise die if God had not allowed them to be there to treat a severe case of asthma or pneumonia. And their hearts thrill with the chance to tell the child's parents about Jesus. They experience the closeness of tight-knit families, extended family support, as a crowd of 20 to 40 people jostles in to watch them help an injured or sick relative. When a patient does need to be transferred to a facility with more resources, family is right there as he is sent via ambulance, primitive and crude as it may be. Now, I made more than one of those wild ambulance rides, like I described you in the first part, accompanying patients with an extensive injury, and I kind of muted out the colors on this, that was beyond my ability to repair. I thought you would thank me for that. Or with a prematurely born baby who would not have lived otherwise. In fact, on one of my trips, I did CPR from the time the baby was born till we got him to the hospital 5 different times, got his heart started again, en route between delivery and getting him there. And when a baby is born just too early to survive in spite of our best efforts, I cried with the parents as I did my best to comfort them with the bright and certain confidence that the little one they buried that day in the crude cardboard box is forever alive with Jesus. Yeah. And they can see him again if they trust in him to forgive their sins. A missionary nurse cringes at the dangerous practices that keep her services in demand, such as the consequences of a fall out of an overloaded transport vehicle like this, that give more opportunities to hone her suture skills. She'll probably grit her teeth and grimace when she nudges worms the size of her finger out of an infected wound. And then when the man who gets shot by bandits on his way to the village to visit his mother arrives in his bullet-riddled, blood-soaked shirt at her clinic, she'll obligingly leave the bullets out of his arm or shoulder. Maybe she will get to deliver babies in dirt-floored houses like this one, which is the home of the little guy that I'm holding here. It was the first foreign baby that I delivered 25 years ago in Nicaragua. And I'm anticipating getting to go back to Nicaragua in March, and I'm in contact with him and hoping I'll get a chance to see him again. I haven't seen him since he was a year or two old. Maybe she'll use a headlamp to welcome a new life into the blackness of a night without electricity, as I did in Haiti 6 years ago. If she does get to help show God's love for people who are reeling with shock and loss after such a disaster as that one that thrust nearly 300,000 souls into eternity, she will see and experience things that will break her heart and send her to her knees for strength and wisdom in dealing with the magnitude of the tragedy. Unbelievable suffering, combined with unthinkable living conditions, made helping in Haiti an experience that was much more than I could ever have imagined missionary nursing to be. The missionary nurses and doctors treated people with horrific burns. That little baby fell into the fire when the earthquake hit, and he fell out of his mother's arms into the fire. We went to those living beside the road who were too ill or injured to come to us. Medical missions done this way definitely get you out of your comfort zone. Fording streams like this one on a motorcycle, sandwiched between a driver and an interpreter, was made especially interesting by the incredible amount of trash and other traffic in the streets that we had to dodge around. wading through the water on our way to a clinic in the mountains with all of the supplies and medicines that we anticipated needing to get to a group of people who had waited hours for us to arrive is not something for which any amount of schooling could have prepared me. And when, in spite of all we could do, our efforts were just too late for the baby who died 2 hours after our team got to the stiflingly hot, tin-walled church-turned-clinic, where his mother brought him in hopes that we could help him. We were comforted in our grief with the thought of those whose lives were saved, because God put us where He could use our medical missionary skills. It has been my privilege to mentor other missionary nurses, as well as national nurses. God has given me the opportunity also to help young people, including my own children, to experience medical missions and see if God wants them to become involved in His kingdom that way. It's my daughter-in-law, and my son Jeffrey, who was with me just in June and July and got to help with some baby deliveries. That was his first diaper change and the baby's first diaper change. First one he did, first one the baby got. No matter where it is, when a woman, such as any of you, makes herself available as a channel for God's love to shine through to a needy world, she will guide people to Jesus and find incredible joy in the journey. And I trust that God will help each of you to find that great delight in following His perfect plan for your life, wherever that is and wherever it takes you. Thank you very much.